All right. It's a little tough when you have to ask the author to stop talking in the front row here. Wow. Well, thank you all for being here. This is the final Read the Revolution speaker series event of this season, and by far the biggest one in terms of subscription. It couldn't possibly be because Pulitzer Prize-winning author Rick Atkinson is here tonight, is it? Yeah. How about it? Yes. Yeah. So I know you're all here because you know who Rick is. So rather than read you a long boilerplate about his many accolades, his incredibly diverse background as a journalist, as a historian, multiple Pulitzer Prize winner, among other accolades and prizes. I just want to point out that one of the great things about Rick's writing, everyone who's ever reviewed his works, whether it's about the Second World War and then the first actual, how many of you read the first edition of the trilogy? Yeah. Virtually everybody here. Whether it's George Will, everybody else who's reviewed it talks about how Rick is able to bring the past to life, to bring characters to life. It's something we grapple with a lot building a museum about the American Revolution, an era that does not have photographs, of course, until with the exception being those aged veterans, in their 70s, 80s, 90s, centenarians. But from the actual period of the Revolution, we don't have the kind of imagery that you have for the American Civil War, for instance. And so it's a constant struggle for us to try to breathe life back into this revolutionary generation, back into the events of this critical founding period. And so when you find an author who just with words, and some pretty well-chosen photographs inside the book as well, images of paintings, and that can really make you feel like you're meeting three-dimensional, fleshed-out characters, you're in for a good ride. So we're here to welcome Rick Atkinson. I just want to do a couple other shout-outs. First of all, how many of you in the room have been down to see Banners of Liberty already? A few of you have slipped in. Right. So, and those of you, we have people from across the country who are watching us through the miracle of live streaming here. Banners of Liberty is the largest gathering of American flags from the Revolutionary War since the end of the Revolutionary War. There are only about 30 surviving flags from the Revolution anywhere in existence, and half of them are on the first floor of the building here. We opened the exhibition on April 19th, the 250th anniversary of the battles of Lexington and Concord. That was book one, volume one. It's just running through August 10th, and if you are like me, you will, and I'm looking particularly at the people in the online audience, you're going, oh, we really got to see that. And I guarantee about 2 or 3 days before it closes, you're going to go, oh, we didn't get there yet. You do not want to miss this exhibition. It's absolutely tremendous. Our curatorial team took my suggestion that let's see how many of these things we can get. And I thought, oh, maybe if we get half a dozen, wouldn't that be cool? But there's actually 16 flags down in the exhibition. And I want to shout out Jim Taub in the back there. Jim was the lead curator. And Matthew Skick, his boss. They have the job that I used to have when I used to have a lot more fun than I have now. I still have a lot of fun, but they get to actually pull these things together. For those of you who are in the room tonight, we often have featured artifacts here, and that's one reason why we want to deny those who are watching online, all the fruits of Read the Revolution. We have 2 weapons from the collection here. One is a French Charleville musket, probably one of the most common arms, long arms of the Continental Army, particularly in the latter years of the Revolutionary War. This one is really tremendous in that it has a surcharge for the United States, so showing Continental Army use. So it's not just a musket like they carried, it is a musket they carried. The rifle that is here was made in the Lehigh Valley of Pennsylvania, so just north of where we're sitting here in Philadelphia. It's one of just a handful of signed and dated rifles from the Revolutionary War that you can confidently say were in existence during these years. What makes this one even more extraordinary is the owner's name inscribed on it, Aaron Atkinson, who was a militia officer from Sussex County, New Jersey, served in the campaigns in 1776. He was at the Battle of Germantown, fought at the Battle of Minnesink in 1780. So that is a weapon, again, that was carried in defense of American liberty and to secure American independence. And so to be in the presence of objects like this, that's why you got to come to a museum, of course. Pictures are great, but we're thanks to you all for bringing that out here this evening. There's another picture coming up here, Hannah, but I don't remember what it is. On June 12th, we'll be presenting the Lenfest Spirit of the American Revolution Award to actor Wes Studi, who sort of came to public attention for his role in the movie Dances with Wolves. You know him as Magua in the Last of the Mohicans. He's gone on to do about 30 films. He was the first Native American actor honored with an Academy Award. And so we're very excited to welcome Wes with some other special guests here to the museum on the 12th of June. So I hope you'll all take a look on the website, and hopefully some of you will be interested in supporting the museum and coming to help us honor him. Then after Banners of Liberty closes in August, the team is going to very quickly break that down and start installing our next special exhibition, The Declaration's Journey, which, as you can see, will open on October 18th. This will be really the largest, most ambitious exhibition, special exhibition the museum has mounted in our 8 years of existence. It is an international loan show exploring the influence of the Declaration of Independence, Philadelphia's greatest export to this day, through 250 years of American history and around the globe. So items coming from places like Chile, Argentina, Mexico, India, sort of telling the story of how the Declaration has been a living document that continues to inspire people around the world as one of our most important statements of human rights. So stay tuned for more to come. And so with that, back to Rick. Rick's going to speak for a little while about the book, then we're going to have a little fireside chat. And for those of you who are online, if you will use that chat function, tell us where you're tuning in from. If you have any questions, we'll try to get a few of those at the end. The indomitable Dr. Tyler Putman is always our mic runner, and we'll hopefully get a chance for those of you in the audience to ask a few questions as well. So without further ado, will you join me in welcoming Rick Atkinson? Friends?
Well, thank you, Scott. Thanks to all of you for being here tonight and inviting me to be with you. I'm amazed at what this museum has become in a few short years. It's an indispensable touchstone in our national history. It's a place of great scholarship and historical veracity, as well as a beautiful portal into the past. So congratulations, Scott, and to all of you. So my family started life in America as Bucks County Quakers after emigrating from England in 1699, and they eventually emigrated again to Philadelphia. My mother was from Prospect Park in Delaware County, down near the airport. My father grew up in Moorestown, right across the river. They were both Nittany Lions. So I love coming back to Philadelphia. I've devoted a professional lifetime to writing about war, 8 books on 5 different American wars at this point. Number 8, The Fate of the Day, was published on Tuesday, and there's no place I'd rather be to mark publication week than here. I've spent the past decade immersed in the revolution on the premise that it tells us something about who we are, where we came from, what our forebears believed, and the most profound question any people can ask themselves, what they were willing to die for. As of this spring, we're swinging into the semi-quincentennial, which sounds like a medical procedure, but is actually the 250th anniversary of the country's founding. And it should be an opportunity for celebration and commemoration about those fundamental questions of who we are, where we came from, what they were willing to die for. The American creation story remains pertinent, vivid, and thrilling. It's a reminder that we are the beneficiaries of an enlightened political heritage handed down to us from that revolutionary generation. And that bequest includes a legacy of personal liberties and strictures on how to divide power and keep it from concentrating in the hands of authoritarians who think primarily of themselves. We cannot allow that heritage to slip away. We cannot allow it to be taken away. We can't be oblivious to this priceless gift or the hundreds of thousands who have given their lives to affirm and sustain it over the past 250 years. So the great Harvard naval historian Samuel Eliot Morison told us that we ought to read history because it would help us to behave better. Now, this from a man who, when interrupted by a barking dog while working at his desk one day, went outside and shot it. History doesn't give us a roadmap for finding our way in 2025, much less navigating our way into the future. But sometimes it can be helpful in other ways. Mark Twain is sometimes credited with telling us that history doesn't repeat itself, but that it rhymes. Well, in 1778, as the British Empire, the first British Empire, was coming unstitched, largely because of the government's botched handling of the American Rebellion, the British writer Horace Walpole wrote, "Children break their playthings to see the inside of them. We've been like babies smashing an empire to see what it was made of." That may resonate with some of you today. It might even rhyme. Well, history can be inspirational. Regardless of the troubles besetting us today, we've overcome greater perils, existential perils, like the Revolution, the Civil War, the Great Depression, World War II. No novelist, regardless of how inventive, could concoct the improbable, heartbreaking, exhilarating story of the American Revolution. History can be cautionary. To those who believe Canada should become the 51st state, it's useful to remember that we've tried this before. Using blandishments and then crude threats to encourage Canada to become the 14th colony. And when that failed, we sent an army into Quebec in 1775. This is the semi-quincentennial of our invasion of Canada. It didn't go well. I invite all empire builders to read The British Are Coming, chapters 5, 8, and 12. History can be instructive. During the 8 years of the American Revolution, Britain was alone with a single ally, tiny Portugal. We Americans won our independence by building the better team, first and indispensably with the French, and then the Spanish, and eventually the Dutch, with other nations providing sympathy and material support. This is the earliest diplomatic lesson in our national history, and perhaps the most important. The better team usually wins, as we certainly saw in both world wars in the last century. Churchill told us that the only thing worse than fighting with allies is fighting without them. And perhaps we should remember that today before we give a thumb in the eye to our closest friends. So this new book, The Fate of the Day, covers a lot of ground. It opens at Versailles in the court of Louis XVI and his spendthrift queen, Marie Antoinette, known around the French court as Madame Deficit. And we spend considerable time there and in Paris, often in the company of our first and best diplomat, Benjamin Franklin. We're also in Britain repeatedly, in the streets of London, in Parliament, and with George III, your last king, trying to understand why he's waging war against his own people for 8 years, as it turns out, across 3,000 miles of open ocean in the age of sail. We're off the south coast of England when a huge French and Spanish invasion armada appears in the late summer of 1779. We're on the northeast coast of England shortly after that when a short, pugnacious, Scottish-born sea dog named John Paul Jones fights to the death aboard the Bonhomme Richard against the Royal Navy frigate Serapis. And along the way, we're on battlefields and in encampments, some of them not far from here. Brandywine, Paoli, Germantown, Red Bank, Oriskany, Bennington, Saratoga, Valley Forge, Monmouth, Savannah, Charleston, where 5,000 American troops are trapped and captured, and the winter of 1779-80 at Morristown, the coldest North American winter in recorded history, when the ice was so thick that cavalry pulling cannons could cross New York Bay from Manhattan to Staten Island. Carriages could cross frozen Chesapeake Bay from the eastern shore to Annapolis. It was cold. There, now you don't have to read the thing. Although, in fact, a lot more happened. Some of it good, some of it bad, some of it simply miraculous. Much about the revolution has been forgotten or distorted. The founders often are either embalmed in reverence or condemned for their manifest flaws. And in truth, there's a lot to dislike about them in the war that they fought for American independence. Certainly 18th century revolutionary rhetoric tended to be aspirational, if not delusional. The stirring assertion, you've got it out here on the wall, that all men are created equal, did not, of course, apply to 500,000 black slaves, 1 in 5 of all people living in America when those fine words were written here in 1776. Nor was it valid for Native Americans, women, indigents. For the 8-year duration of the American Revolution, those who remained loyal to the British Crown and even fence straddlers, skeptical of armed rebellion against the government, often were subjected to dreadful treatment. Disenfranchisement, confiscation, beatings, exile, and occasionally execution. Partisan belligerence metastasized into civil war. Our first Civil War. At least 25,000 Americans died for the cause, and perhaps many more. A larger proportion of our population to perish in any of our wars other than the Civil War. The enduring image of a yeoman farmer grabbing his musket after leaving his plow in the furrow to go out on behalf of freedom is mostly mythical. Rabid enthusiasm for the patriot cause faded quickly after 1775, when the ranks at first had been filled with propertied freeholders and tradesmen, many of whom soon returned to their farms, their shops, their tanneries, to attend to their families and businesses that they could no longer ignore. Instead, the army increasingly depended on the landless young, the poor, the desperate, sometimes the shiftless. These ranks included unemployed laborers, apprentices, farmhands, servants, drifters, and recent immigrants, notably Irish Protestants driven to America by crop failures and the collapse of the weaving industry. They needed the income, even if it was only the $6 a month that a private earned in the Continental Army. States began conscripting troops, sometimes with names drawn from a hat, although they permitted the hiring of substitutes for the Continental Army service or the buying of exemptions with a fine. In New Jersey, drafted masters enrolled their slaves or their indentured servants in their stead, and up to 40% of that state's Continentals were substitutes. Maryland began forcing vagrants into the Army. Desertion was such a persistent problem that General George Washington warned, "We shall be obliged to detach one half of the Army to bring back the other half." Washington himself remains heavily mythified. Ed L'Engle here in the front row was running the Washington Papers project at the University of Virginia, one of the most spectacular gifts to the nation, and Ed knows George Washington better than anyone in the country, I would warrant. But the man proverbially incapable of telling a lie could certainly be disingenuous, notably in his dispatches to Congress after yet another battlefield setback. He at times was moody, self-pitying, with a molten temper. He complained in 1777, "I do not think any officer since the creation ever had such a variety of difficulties and perplexities to encounter as I have." For much of the Revolution, he was an indifferent tactician, and his generalship proved a medley of miscalculation and misfortune, periodically redeemed with bold aggression and the good luck provided by stumbling enemies, providential fogs, and bullets that barely missed. During Washington's lifetime at Mount Vernon, at least 577 slaves worked the plantation. It's an appalling reminder that much of the country's prosperity was predicated on human bondage. One of those enslaved men said of Washington, "I'd never see that man laugh to show his teeth. He'd done all his laughing inside." Well, that no doubt reflected a lifetime of dental miseries that kept him tight-lipped. But it was also because, as an aide wrote, the weight of the whole war may justly be said to rest upon his shoulders. John Adams, who was wary of what he called the superstitious veneration accorded Washington by many Americans, nevertheless conceded that his great manly virtues reassured the public, as did his rectitude and his readiness to sacrifice self-interest for the greater good. And in truth, he embodied the classical virtues cherished by his countrymen: fortitude, prudence, temperance, and the subordination of private advantage to public benefit. Washington defined it as one steady line of conduct for the good of the great whole. Repeatedly refusing to use his power for his own ends, he consciously tried to emulate the Roman republicans he admired, notably Lucius Quintius Cincinnatus, a Roman military leader who saved Rome on the battlefield, but then put away his sword and retired to his farm. Let me talk for a moment about the other George, our last king, George III. He wasn't a tyrant, as the Declaration of Independence alleges, or a royal brute, as the polemicist Thomas Paine insisted in his essay Common Sense, published here in January 1776. He wasn't the sinister ninny who prances across the stage every night in Hamilton, singing, "You'll be back." George was instead a dutiful, diligent, constitutional monarch, a patriot king. Shaped by the Enlightenment, He promoted both arts and sciences, sponsoring the Royal Academy's founding in 1768, amassing the 65,000 books in his own library that would form the core of the British Library, building an observatory at Richmond Palace where he personally took measurements of the transit of Venus across the sun in 1769 to help gauge the size of the solar system. He played the flute, the piano, the harpsichord, and organ, while also writing a treatise on crop rotation under the pen name Ralph Robinson for the periodical Annals of Agriculture. Always intrigued by how things are made, from buttons and pins to canals and naval cordage, George also collected 2,000 clocks, watches, chronometers, barometers, and other gadgets, some of which he disassembled to study their innards. A decade ago, the late Queen Elizabeth II opened up to outside scrutiny the Georgian papers, which she owned, as part of a project to catalog and digitize the papers from all four Georges who were king in the 18th and 19th centuries. There are 500,000 pages, most of them from the reign of George III, who was king for almost 60 years, and most of them previously unpublished. I was among the first allowed in to take a look for a whole month at Windsor Castle, just west of London, where the papers are stored. And every morning I would flash my badge at the Henry VIII gate to get into the castle, and again at the Norman gate, and then climb 102 stone steps and 21 wooden stairs to the garret of the Round Tower, begun by William the Conqueror in the 11th century. And there are the papers in gorgeous, oversized red binders. George was his own secretary until late in life when he began to go blind, and he wrote not only most of his correspondence himself, he also made the copies. And as you paw through these pages, there's a tactile sense of being in his presence. Among other things, he's a great list maker. Lists of British garrisons abroad from 1764 to 1775, of Royal Navy vessels under construction in various shipyards, of all his regiments in America with the number of officers, musicians, and rank and file troops for each of these, tabulated with his arithmetic scratchings in the margins as he does his sums. George copied out his own recipes for cough syrup: rosemary, rice, vinegar, brown sugar, all boiled in silver. And insecticide: wormwood, vinegar, lime, swine's fat, quicksilver. He'd married an obscure drab German princess, Charlotte, as in Charlotte, North Carolina, Charlottesville, Virginia. She learned to play God Save the King on the harpsichord during her voyage to England from Germany. They married 6 hours after they met, and he had the marriage bedroom decorated with 700 yards of blue damask and large basins of goldfish. Because nothing says I love you like a bowl of goldfish. He called her the queen of my heart, and she shared his piety as well as his affection for the composer Handel, for country dances, for the theater. He indulged her fondness for jewelry, dogs, and snuff. The happy union proved fertile. She produced children with lunar regularity, eventually to number 15. And we see in his personal correspondence that George was a caring father. He's invested in the rearing of his children. He's invested in, and through all this, he's trying to figure out the proper course for the British Empire, for the monarchy, and for his people. He's easy enough to dislike, but impossible, I find, to simply dismiss as a reactionary autocrat. However, he could be ruthless, self-righteous, and so mulish that he threatened abdication unless his government maintained a hard line against American independence. Blows must decide, George declared, and the war he chose to wage was brutal, bloody, and often savage. Unlike modern war, killing in the 18th century was usually intimate, at very close range, face to face, often with a bayonet. That's partly because 18th century muskets, like the one over here, were mostly inaccurate beyond 80 yards and almost hopeless much beyond 100 yards. Scholars have calculated that in the fights at Lexington and Concord and the British retreat to Boston on the first day of the war, April 19th, 1775, the Americans fired at least 75,000 rounds, but only one bullet in every 300 or so actually hit a redcoat. The shot heard around the world probably missed. But the bullets that did find a target could be devastating. A 1-ounce lead musket slug from that Charleville musket there could stop a charging bull, literally. At the Battle of Bunker Hill on June 17, 1775, the British in 4 hours captured about a square mile of rebel-held terrain at a cost of more than 1,000 British casualties, including 226 British dead. I'll invoke one scene from the fate of the day. It's February 18th, 1779, another dreary winter. The Continental Army was camped in bivouacs across northern New Jersey. General Washington and his officers organized a homely celebration to commemorate the first anniversary of the French alliance with the American cause. It was a critical development that ultimately was vital to securing our independence. And at this celebration, 13 cannons fired a salute, an army band played, and the guests wandered through 13 illuminated arches, decorated with paintings depicting scenes from the war so far. The first shots at Lexington, the triumph at Saratoga, the burning of Falmouth, Norfolk, and other American towns. A final arch depicted a future peaceable America as, quote, a rising empire, her rivers covered with merchant ships and canals traversing the land. This is why they're fighting, suffering, and dying. They see peace, prosperity, a land stretching from sea to shining sea. They see us. Before Scott and I pick up the conversation, I'll close by recalling that in 1790, Benjamin Franklin, whose service to the cause included that duty in France as the country's first and greatest diplomat, died at the age of 84, a stone's throw from here. But a few months before he passed, he wrote in a letter to a friend one of the lines for which he's best remembered. Our new Constitution is now established. Everything seems to promise that it will be durable. But in this world, nothing is certain except death and taxes. What he's telling us, virtually from the grave, is that there's work to be done. The dream endures, but so does the struggle. America is predicated on an idea that all men and women are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That should act as a pole star for us, to provide true north, telling us what it is we think we can do as a people. The perpetual challenge of the American experiment is to draw on these aspirational ideals, to make them our own, to hand them off to our children and our grandchildren, and to use that as a propulsion system for being the nation that those forebears thought we could become. Thank you again for having me here this evening. Thank you.
Fantastic.
thought you were going to say the bar's open.
The only thing between you and a drink is our conversation. Yeah. Rick, I think one of the things I found so powerful about your remarks at the end, but also throughout the book, is there was a period when military historians who were writing about the revolution, you know, sort of the impact of the new social history, of digging into the social composition of Continental Army regiments, and, you know, really emphasizing that after the so-called rage militaire, you know, the first year of the war, when the yeoman farmers, you know, were springing from their hearthsides to fight to, at that point, restore their rights as British subjects. But then when it becomes a sort of long, grinding, protracted war, that, as in most wars, the social status of the recruits tends to drop, right? And these tend to be men who do not have a material stake in the conflict. And there was a tendency on the part of a certain generation of historians to say, therefore, they're basically mercenaries. They're only there to, you know, make a few dollars to scrape together. And I know the late historian Charles Royster wrote a wonderful essay at the end of his book on the Continental Army, of saying, you know, there were a lot easier ways to make a few bucks during the Revolutionary War than to risk your life and limb. And so I think you do such a great job of really doing what Washington did, which was constantly reminding the soldiery of what the cause was that they were fighting for.
Yeah, it's the essence of his leadership. You know, every leader is trying to motivate his subordinates to embrace a cause of some sort. And for Washington, one of the things we see about him, and I think Ed Lengel would agree with this, is that he's remarkably articulate. He, in both writing and orally, you rarely leave the commanding general's presence without having a pretty clear idea what his intent is. And certainly in his written orders and general orders that are read to the troops, there's a precision to it and a clarity of thinking that, first of all, bespeaks the big brain that he's got. It's organized for executive action. And he certainly, for 8 years, stays the course. In those 8 years, he only goes home to Mount Vernon once, and it's quite briefly, and it's pretty late in the war. And
one of the many reasons why we believe the most important home of George Washington is his tent that's right below where we're sitting.
So
here.
true, yes.
But shout out to Doug Bradburn and Mount Vernon, who keep that other place that he liked as well.
Other place, yeah. It's a lot more expensive to keep that place up than the tent. So I think, you know, one of the, looking back 250 years later, we can see that he's remarkably astute in the way he motivates men who are fighting for him. I think when he first gets to Cambridge and takes command of the new Continental Army as the new commanding general in July 1775, he's got a lot to learn. You know, he talks privately about dirty New Englanders. He's a Virginian who's been sent to command a Continental Army that's continental really in name only. It's mostly composed initially of New England militia. And he doesn't really doesn't really understand, I think, initially, the sacrifice that these men are making to leave their farms, their shops, their families, to come and join him in the cause. The mystical bond between leader and led for any organization, but particularly for an army, is something that he grows into. And that's another reason we can, I think, legitimately revere him. He grows into it, he rises to the occasion, and he comes to recognize what these soldiers are giving up. I mean, he's got all those slaves back in Mount Vernon taking care of business for him while he's away, but he forges this bond with the soldiery and it's going to carry through right to 1783. So it's a remarkable thing, and I feel privileged to watch it.
Do you find, did you find evidence, or do you find compelling the belief that one of the things that evolves as a result of his military experience is an evolution in his views of slavery because of the service of men of African descent in the Continental Army? Because, of course, when he arrives in Cambridge, you know, the first impulse on the orders of Congress is to discharge all of these men.
Right. Yeah, I don't know how much he evolves, to be honest. We'd like to think that he's becoming enlightened, but you cannot square the circle morally of 577 slaves over the course of his lifetime at Mount Vernon. He accommodates black troops. He sort of grudgingly agrees to the notion that maybe if we arm the blacks, it will help us with our manpower problem. John Lawrence, the abolitionist son of Henry Lawrence. Henry Lawrence has been the largest slave trader in America out of Charleston, and he succeeds John Hancock as president of Congress. Here, John is got a scheme, and he convinces his father grudgingly to endorse it, of arming blacks in South Carolina particularly, and Washington is kind of, whatever. So, when you read the papers that Ed and others have so beautifully curated, you see, first of all, that he's very involved in there's no detail of husbandry at Mount Vernon that he doesn't care about, and it's partly to get away from the war. It's charming, actually. And his letters to Lunt, Washington, his cousin and overseer, are very interesting. But you see, there's a correspondence back and forth about whether a certain slave whose husband is pleading that she not be separated, that the marriage not be broken up, and she's going to be sent off to Washington's mother to take care of Washington's mother. You don't see any real human empathy there. So I think, yes, at the end of his life, he frees the 1799 when he dies. He frees the slaves that he personally has owned. We'll give him, he gets extra credit for that. But I don't really think that there's a lot of evolution in his thinking during the war.
So I'm curious if there was a dinner that occurred during the war, or you could assemble a dream dinner party of the characters in the book there. Who did you find sort of most interesting, compelling?
Oh, gosh. Well, the New York Times asked me a couple weeks ago if I could have a dinner with any writers, living or dead, who would I invite? And the reporting opportunity is too great to, say Shakespeare or whatever. And the three that I picked, and the Times printed this, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and that British fellow who wrote the fall of the Roman Empire, because he was Edward Gibbon, because he was a member of Parliament as he was writing about the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. I think if there was one meal, I would really like to have been to the dinner that was occurring at Saratoga with General Gates. This is before the Second Battle of Saratoga, October 7th, 1777. General Gates is Horatio Gates, the commanding general. Benedict Arnold. And the two of them have been feuding, and Arnold's got his nose out of joint, and Gates is trying to handle this tempestuous fellow who happens to be the best tactical commander on either side in the first couple of years of the war. And there were other staff officers there, because as they're tucking into their dinner, word comes that the British are advancing again, and the battle is about to be joined. And there's a conversation back and forth, and details of it are recorded by witnesses. And we've got a pretty good account of it, but I'd like to be there to take better notes. And Arnold says to Gates, let me go out there and take command of the battle, which he had done in the first Battle of Saratoga in September. And Gates says, Arnold, I don't know if I can trust you. And Arnold pleads with him and says, I'll be careful. I won't do anything to, destroy the army. And so Gates finally lets him go. Now, as dramatic moments go, and Arnold rushes off and, helps to save the day. And then Arnold, at the end of this long afternoon, having been shot once in the leg during the assault on Quebec, is shot again in the same leg and severely wounded. His horse falls on him, and he's going to be months, really years, recuperating from this. I think if I had to pick a meal, I'd like to be at that one.
Pretty good. So I'd love to talk about the Philadelphia campaign just because we're here, and I reread that chapter this afternoon because, both armies marched right down the street that's right behind us here.
Yeah.
In August and September of 1777. And we were talking about Brandywine a little bit earlier, and I think still considered the largest land battle of the Revolutionary War, and both commanders present.
Yeah.
What's the, was there a chance that could have gone a different way?
Brandywine?
Yeah.
There's always a chance it can go a different way. That's one of the things about war. Again, we see Washington is not a very good tactical commander at Brandywine. I think that this is a guy who's, made his living at one point as a surveyor. He ought to be able to read the land pretty well, and he does not read Brandywine. He has not read Long Island well. He doesn't recognize that he can be outflanked. At Brandywine, he does not go out and scout the land himself. He doesn't have reliable reports of what the terrain looks like, and he gets outflanked again. And it's a near-run thing. He just, he saves the army ultimately by having Greene reinforce the troops out there. But it's a brutal butt-kicking that the army takes. So I think it could have gone the other way, and it also could have gone the way of the army being trapped and destroyed. So I think one of the most interesting things that happened here, and so many interesting things happened here in the Philadelphia campaign. Paoli is shortly after that, and that's a catastrophe. In Germantown, that was a near-run thing. Washington is nothing if not aggressive, and so he pulls the army together again, and he devises an overly complicated plan. 4 different attack axes with 4 different columns of falling on Germantown, 5 miles north of here, supposedly simultaneously after marching all night. And it goes really well at first. And then at Chew House, which is still there, you can go see the bullet marks in the walls. He listens to Henry Knox, who doesn't know what he's talking about. And Knox says, it would be militarily improper to leave a fortress behind.
He'd read about it while he was a bookseller.
That's right. This is book learning. He said it'd be military improper to leave a fortress. In this case, it's occupied by about 100 British soldiers, and they're good, and they have barricaded themselves in this house. What they should have done is just encircle it, going around it, and isolate it. And that small regiment, that depleted regiment, is not going anywhere. But instead, Washington listens to Knox, and they stay there, and it disrupts the whole attack. And Germantown is they're gonna snatch defeat right out of the jaws of victory. I think Red Bank is actually one of the more interesting. Is it that way? Yeah. Yeah, wherever New Jersey is. Because that is such a drubbing that the Hessians take. And I won't go through the whole thing. I'm sorry, you'll have to read the book. But the Germans looking to recoup the honor of the Hessians that had been sullied in the defeat at Trenton, plead to make an attack on the American garrison across the river at Red Bank. And there is a small fort there, and they cross the Delaware, and they attack, and it is very poorly handled. It's such a beating. The commander's killed. Many of them are killed. It's a real slaughter. And you can go over there and you can look at it for yourselves, as I'm sure many of you have. My reading is that it really takes the wind out of German enthusiasm for serving as British.
Sort of their Bunker Hill, in a sense.
Definitely, there's a lot about Bunker Hill to it. And there are units, the German light infantry remain committed to it, and they're very good. But for the most part, I think your average Hessian soldier says, oh man, I just want to go back to Dusseldorf or whatever. So.
On the printed on the wall of the gallery down below us here, where we're talking about the Hessians, and you're chronologically around the time of Trenton and Princeton, we have printed on the wall lyrics translated into English from a German soldier's song from 1776 that you may know, is all about, we're going to go to America, and this thing cannot possibly take more than a month or two, and then the women will be ours, the land will be ours, everyone will sit under their vine and fig tree, and what could possibly go wrong?
Yeah. That's what we in the literary business call irony, Scott.
It's a shout out here or a recommendation. Red Bank, as Rick says, is an incredibly evocative place to visit, and just 20 minutes from where we are here at 3rd and Chestnut. So many of these battlefields, of course, have been destroyed by urban sprawl. It's very difficult, for instance, to tour the New York campaign, without a lot of imagination. Red Bank, there are still earthworks there. You can trace where the American entrenchments were. Several years ago, a couple of us here, Tyler and I, had a chance to see an excavation that was taking place on the site, and they actually uncovered the remains of about 16 Hessian soldiers that had been interred there after the conflict. And you could really see, it was one of the most evocative moments where the horror of that kind of warfare. These are men who were not only taking fire from soldiers, American soldiers, but from American naval vessels on the river.
I mean, it's quite a poignant thing, and I think poignancy is important to really feel empathy for those, including our former enemies, because there's a Quaker house that still stands there, a Quaker household, and they want no part of the war, and the war falls on them, which often happens in war, and in this house, and looks much as it did in 1777, 1778, becomes a hospital, and there are many, many soldiers who die in that house, and so and Colonel von Donop, who's the commander, he's going to linger, a painful death, and he's buried over there, and his bones become relics afterward. Apparently there's a New Jersey physician who had his skull on his desk for a while. So the poignancy of what happened to them, I think, is very touching, and you can really feel it over there.
Dr. Putman.
A couple of questions on Zoom. Rick, people are really interested in your literary career, and maybe I just might ask, you were embedded in Iraq in 2003. You wrote 3 beautiful books about the liberation of Europe in World War II. Are there interesting historical connections you see between those works and those studies you did and the American Revolution?
Thank you for that question. Well, I'm a military brat. My father, the Moorestown kid, joined the Army during World War II and went to Penn State after the war and then went back into the Army. So I grew up on Army posts, and I've been around the military all my life. And as a newspaper reporter, I spent a lot of time in bad places. Somalia 3 times, Bosnia twice, Iraq for the Persian Gulf War, Iraq again. And I was with then Major General Dave Petraeus when he commanded the 101st Airborne. I was with him for 2 months at his elbow all day, every day. It's useful. My experience in those circumstances is useful, I think. I have a visceral understanding through watching the contemporaneous military of what it's like to command. Watching Petraeus work his way through this mystical bond between leader and led. Watching him negotiate his way with his superiors, the Corps commander, the Army commander, the theater commander, and then with his subordinates, his brigade commanders, battalion commanders, on down to the individual soldier level. These issues would be familiar, as would infantry life generally, to Thucydides. There's certain eternal verities about war that I think living it as a journalist gives me a visceral sense of it, and it's useful in writing about it as a historian. You know, I spent 15 years writing about the American role in the liberation of Europe in World War II. I lived with Dwight Eisenhower metaphorically for 15 years. I've now got the same relationship with Washington. I see a lot of parallels between them, completely different in their backgrounds. Poor kid born in Texas, grew up in Abilene, Kansas. Washington to the manor born, rich guy marries the richest widow in Virginia, all those slaves, blah, blah, blah. But as generals, as leaders, they've got a lot in common. Starting with those big brains organized for executive action, with their talent for spotting subordinate talent, their capabilities of spotting subordinate talent. Washington looks around, sees a 25-year-old Boston bookseller who's overweight, and somehow discerns that this is going to be the father of American artillery, Henry Knox. He sees a lapsed Quaker from Rhode Island named Nathaniel Greene, and somehow recognizes that this guy is going to be second only to Washington as the indispensable man in the Continental Army. So I think that writing about these other conflicts, both as a historian and previously in an earlier life as a journalist, does help to inform what I'm doing now.
Fantastic.
Thank you for taking the questions. Atkinson, I've read all your books, which is great.
Thank you.
Son served in Iraq, so I know that's enough. My name's Bob Cochran. I'm from Wilmington, Delaware. I'm a descendant. I'm a son of the American Revolution. One of my ancestors fought for the 5th Pennsylvania Battalion. So this is all very important to me. My question is this. In her book on John Dickinson, Jane Calvert, Heaven and the Founding, makes a compelling case that Dickinson was the leading voice of people to sort of take a cautious approach to declaring independence from England. We didn't have an army, we didn't have a navy, we weren't even organized. But by early 1776, that was all turned on its head, and everybody rushed headlong into declaring independence. Can you talk about what it was that took people either from being on the fence or the other side of the fence to saying, yeah, we need to declare independence from England?
Yeah. Well, there's several things, several dynamics at play here. One is when the blood starts to flow at Lexington, Concord, the retreat to Boston, Bunker Hill, and on, then the game changes. Again, I've seen it myself. You know, the stakes are raised. The wolf rises in the gorge. You've seen your best buddy have his brains blown out on the left, or you've seen your neighbor on the right badly wounded in the leg. And this is a propulsion system of its own. War takes on its own momentum. It becomes a grudge match pretty quickly. And to some extent, it's hard to turn back once the killing begins. So I think that that's part of it. You know, you have to say that Thomas Paine is an influential voice. Are
you saying writers are important?
Oh, yeah. Well, they used to be, back when people actually read. You know, you read that even today, and certainly when they read it in January '76, they read it and it gave voice to what people in kind of an inchoate way were feeling about it. And he bluntly talks about the royal brute. So the king becomes part of what we tiptoed around the king early on in the run up to the killing, and then really in the first months of the war. But Paine helps to inflame people. There's little question about that. The propaganda machine that the rebel leadership is running generally is brilliant. I mean, it starts after Lexington and Concord with organizing the collection of affidavits from witnesses, some of which are even true. It starts with the chartering of the Cuero, a fast ship, and taking those affidavits and the early newspaper accounts and the narrative that the city fathers in and around Boston want to propel, and sending it across the Atlantic so that it arrives in London and is printed in friendly newspapers there weeks before General Gage's account arrives. And General Gage's account is 4 paragraphs, and it ends with, "Oh, by the way, we're surrounded." You know, and so this is an example of, I think, some of the underappreciated aspects of the brilliance of the propaganda machine that the founders are running, including Franklin, who's at the center of some of this. So there's a lot going on here that is kind of pushing people from those initial thoughts that all we want, as Scott said, is to kind of reestablish our legitimacy as British citizens to, hell no, we don't want to be British citizens. We're done with that. We want something else. We want something better.
By the way, of course, the 5th Pennsylvania was at Ticonderoga when the Declaration of Independence was first read. So your ancestor first heard those words. One of the flags and banners of liberty downstairs is one of the Pennsylvania regimental flags that was there. That flag heard the Declaration read at the same place.
Oh, interesting, huh?
And it was last in Philadelphia in the 1780s, so it's just back for a brief visit. So
yeah. Dean, we're going to hear from George Washington himself.
I thought it was Gandalf.
Yeah, well, we fixed that, didn't we? Thank you, Dean. I mean, one of the things about Washington is he is our greatest political general. He's the first, and he's only closely matched by Eisenhower. And by political general, I mean in Washington's case, all right, he shows up in Cambridge, and very early as commanding general, he's writing scores of letters to colonial governors. They're not state governors yet, but to governors, to committees of safety, to Congress over and over again. He's doing several things. He's laying out his needs and his wants, again, usually with great articulation. He is making very clear, one of the greatest gifts that he's given to us, that he is subservient to the civilian leadership. They're very aware of the danger of a coup from a general who gets big ideas about himself. They're very aware of Cromwell. And Washington is at pains throughout the war to assure the civilian leadership that he is the servant of that civilian leadership. It's why we've never had a coup. It's why the many general officers I know today would never even think about it. They recoil at the idea. So he's dealing with Congress, and he writes one letter. Ed will know precisely where this was, where at the end of the letter, it's to a friend in Virginia. He laments the decline of Congress, that the men who were here, the 56 signers were here, in many cases have gone off to other things. And he says, where's Jefferson? Why isn't he here? And he goes through Mason maybe, and Wythe and others. Where are they? Why aren't they here? Meaning here in Philadelphia with Congress. So he's exasperated by Congress. He's exasperated by Congress's inability to combat perhaps the greatest danger to the cause, and that is the decline in worth of the dollar. That $6 that a private's earning is worth nothing by 1779 or so. Not worth a continental is a phrase that's literally true. And Congress seems incapable of doing anything other than printing money, more worthless dollars. It's a very tough problem. It's, you can't entirely blame them for what they're doing, but his soldiers at Valley Forge are 2,000 or more men die at Valley Forge, and they die of disease, they die of malnutrition. Where's clothing? Where's the proper clothing? What's Congress doing about that? Where's food? He finally turns to Nathaniel Greene and says, I need you to be my quartermaster general. And Greene says, I don't want to. Nobody in history has ever heard of a quartermaster general, quote unquote. And Washington says, you gotta. I need you to do this. And Greene does it. He does it brilliantly for 2 years. He helps to really save the Army in that dark winter and help right the ship a bit in terms of logistics. But all of these issues that Congress ought to be handling first and foremost, Congress is the national government to the extent that it is one. It is the executive, it is the legislative, and it is to some extent the judiciary combined. Well, especially as we get later into the war and inferior men are members of Congress, and they're all men, which is one of the reasons the war took so long. Inferior men may or may not show up. It's another big problem. If you get 20 people here, and whenever here is threatened, the capital's threatened, they're out of town, man. They're headed to Baltimore, they're headed to York or wherever. You can see that he's very much exasperated by this, but nevertheless, being extraordinarily adept as a political general, he keeps working it. It's something to watch.
This has been a wonderful conversation, and clearly there are more questions than we can answer now. So I did want to let everyone know that Rick Atkinson will be signing books afterwards. I would encourage you to take time and ask him a question yourself, but it is our tradition to give our last question to Dr. Scott Stevenson.
Well, Rick, we're all anticipating eagerly the upcoming American Revolution series on PBS that Ken Burns and Sarah Botstein and David Schmidt have been working on for as long as we've been working on this museum, it seems like.
Yeah, 10 years.
And it's going to, I think the week before Thanksgiving, you've been involved for a couple of years now. Can you give us any hint of how excited we're going to be and what you think this is going to do for, as we're heading into that medical procedure called the semi-quincentennial?
Some of you certainly know by now that Burns has been working on this with Sarah and David and a large crew for the better part of 10 years now. It's 12 hours, 6 parts. It will air on PBS in mid-November. I've been involved with it for 3 years now in a big way. I've seen the whole thing. Ken is now out and about promoting it, and he's doing, I think he's 24 cities, something like that. I was with him in Richmond and then in Williamsburg. Scott was there. And then 2 weeks ago, I was with him in Lexington and Concord, and he shows a 42-minute clip reel, extracts from the film, and then we sit on stage and talk about it, and there are other events ahead for us. It's a beautiful thing. I mean, it's extraordinarily vivid and beautifully done. I think that people will be riveted by it. He's got issues, as you can imagine. There are no veterans. There are no to interview. There are no photographs. It's 250 years ago, and so he's got to be adroit in bringing that back to life. I'm very struck by his meticulous attention to historical accuracy. I saw the thing in New York in September, and, I would say to him at one point, you keep showing Washington with epaulets on his shoulders and general stars for his rank. And they didn't do that until, I think it was June 1779. Before then, they wore a blue sash, and Burns says, oh, God damn. So I think that it will inspire people. I think it will engross people. I hope that it becomes a predicate for a wide national conversation. When we were in Concord, I'll tell this as a final story. He shows 42 minutes, and it's largely the scenes from Lexington, Concord, the British retreat to Boston on April 19th, 1775. And afterwards, we're on stage, and we're talking about it. And at the end, he says, I want you all, and there's a huge adoring crowd there for him. He says, I want you all to remember, we're going to show the first part, November 16th this year. Please tune in to your PBS station. November 16th happens to be Rick's birthday. And for 10 years, we've been thinking, what can we do that's really special for Rick's birthday? And he won't let it go. And he said, so when you're watching this, remember to sing Happy Birthday, Rick. Anyway, I think it's pretty wonderful, birthdays aside. And I think that it will be inspiring. I think it'll be riveting. And I think that you all will really enjoy it.
I think we need to do a watch party here at the museum, don't you think? Yeah. Very good. Very good. Well, thank you, Rick.
Thank you very much.